Okay, we are recording. So with that, I will pass it off to our presenters, Gretchen and Brian.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone, welcome. My name is Brian McCormick. I am a professor of health and rehabilitation sciences at Temple University, and an investigator with the Temple University Collaborative on Community Inclusion. And today is part 2 of a series of webinars on the role of family and family leisure in family functioning, particularly for parents with a mental illness. And we'll let Gretchen introduce herself now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gretchen Sneathen. I also work at Temple University, and I'm the Associate Director for the Collaborative on Community Inclusion. And we are excited today. If you attended our last webinar, we sort of went over the benefits of family leisure. And today we're going to get into some of the strategies that you might use in order to participate in family leisure. And this is complementary to an intervention project that we have going on at the Collaborative, which we are actively recruiting for right now. So if this is something that you are personally interested in, or there are individuals that you support, you are welcome to message us. We'll have more information about that project at the end of the webinar. And just for your information, Hannah, who is sort of running some of the background stuff on the webinar, she is the interventionist for that project. And so, she, if it helps to put a face with the project, then that is Hannah.
I also sent a link to our website that has more information about the study via the chat. So you can always click on that to find out more as well.
So today we're going to go over some strategies that you might use to identify family interests in community participation. We talk about community participation broadly, but we will be focusing on community leisure activities that occur in the community. And in that conversation, we'll also talk about potential barriers or facilitators for community participation. And then we'll end with some strategies that you might use, or you might use with someone to participate in, to support families to participate in the community. And this is just a quick recap of what we covered last week, or I'm sorry, 3 weeks ago. Brian and I do a lot of webinars together, and there was one last week, but it wasn't parenting. Mm-hmm. So we talked about the difference between core family leisure and balanced family leisure. And this is just a quick refresher that core family leisure are often those things that occur at home. They're frequently low cost, and they are also high frequency. Some examples might be family meals, entertainment, like watching TV or having movie night. I know when I was growing up, Friday night, we would often bring in pizza and watch a movie together. And then it could be games and craft. And the benefits of these types of activities are increased or improved communication, family cohesion, and stability, because they are things that recur pretty frequently. And then balanced family leisure, which is more what we're talking about today, because these are things that happen outside of the home, or often happen outside of the home, and require a little bit more planning and possibly more resources, not always financial resources, but time, resources like planning and sort of social resources that you might need to participate. And some examples could include attending a sporting event, going for outdoor hikes or bike rides, or going to museums or community fairs that might be occurring. And these are beneficial to family adaptability and also developing that we-ness, or that family identity.
Great. So one of the things for those who might be familiar with us at the Collaborative is that our main focus really is on community participation, that we see as being actually more than concepts of integration or even inclusion, but ways in which people with serious mental illness have opportunities to be a significant part of the communities in which they live, to engage in the aspects of the communities which they are interested in, And one of the documents that really is one of the foundational documents for us is a document called Well Together. And Well Together was originally developed for Wellways Australia by Mark Salzer, who's the director of the collaborative, and Rick Barron. And it really identified a number of fundamental concepts around the idea of community inclusion and community participation. And when we start to think about family leisure and community participation, it really touches on a number of different areas of participation. One of the first ones is this idea, Fundamental 5, that community inclusion should embrace multiple domains of mainstream life. And for many parents with a mental health condition, there may be barriers to them being able to fulfill this role and being a part of their communities as a parent in a very, I think, incredible study of stigma around mental health in 16 countries around the world. Some of the most strongly endorsed stigmas are around people with mental health condition being parents or being around children. And so in many ways that parents particularly have a lot of barriers to being able to fulfill this role and being part of a parent and being a family as part of being everyday life. And many people are parents, a large number of people are parents, and it provides them an opportunity to be a part of that. Fundamental 6 really says community inclusion focuses on participation occurring like everyone else. And this also speaks to the idea of how do we, on an everyday basis, engage with our families and leisure in the community as part of that. Does it require special programs or special supports? Because this is not like everyone else. And this is, I think, one of the challenges we have when things are group-based interventions. And this is really, most adults participate independently or in groups of their own creation. And so this is another area I think that is fundamental. When we look at number 7, fundamental 7, that community inclusion is strengthened through support technology and natural supports of family and friends, as well as peers. This is an area that we've been very interested in looking at, is how to support people to develop the supports that they need to engage in activities that they are of interest to them, particularly as a parent and as a family. Sometimes we use technologies to be able to coordinate times and schedules, to be able to find opportunities, to be able to identify things that are within our resources, whether that's time, whether that's money, whether that's transportation. And so family participation, family leisure participation really is facilitated through these technologies and natural supports. And then directly related to families is providing support to family and other natural supports, because it supports natural community inclusion and community participation like everyone else. I happen to be a family member of someone who has a serious mental illness, and she had a number of supports to be able to remain connected with her children, who are now adults, and actually be a part of their lives. And that parenting role was actually a very important role for this family member to be able to be engaged and be able to work with their children to support them and be supported by them. And so one of the things that we're going to do next is a poll.
Here it is.
Yeah, there we go. On how family leisure might make people feel. And I know that what we're talking about here is doing fun things with kids, because we understand that sometimes family leisure can be something that takes some time, and there can also be some negative experiences as a result of it. But when doing fun things with your kids, what are some of the experiences that you've had? Some of these choices, can stop being the parent. That's one of the things that I think a lot of times is to me, it was to me enjoyable, and still is, in that as a parent, you typically are also a limit setter. but sometimes in things we do for fun with our kids, we can be funny and make fun of ourselves. And
can everyone see? Oh, am I muted? No,
you're not.
I was a minute ago. Can everyone see the results on their screen? I see them.
I see them too.
Okay. Hopefully attendees can see them as well. And but it looks like, you know, there's a lot of feeling more connected with your child, joyful. So there's some common things across participants or across the audience members that people are feeling when they connect, when they participate in family leisure with their kids. And if you can't see them, I can show them here so you can see them.
And it's interesting too. I think one of the things that we talked about last time, Gretchen, was one of the outcomes oftentimes of family leisure is this positive emotional experience and the values that has for communication. I mean, one of the things that we do know about human experience is that when people are experiencing positive emotions, it's easier to connect with them. It's easier to communicate with them. People tend to be more open and more approachable. And so there really is some great value in experiencing positive emotion as part of an activity.
I agree. And Brian, I think your point about, you know, not feeling like the parent, I mean, obviously there's the responsibilities of making sure everyone is safe, but some of that depends on the age of your children, but being able to be in a less serious role, I think is great, because it gives you the opportunity to sort of relax and just have fun and be in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for kids to see as well, because they see, you know, life is stressful. There's work obligations, there's financial obligations, there's all the other things that draw our attention, and are, as much as we try to shield kids from those types of stressors, they see it. And so when they are able to see parents in these more relaxed roles, it kind of gives them it sends the message that it's okay to have fun.
Yeah. Yep.
And I will go to the next one.
So some of the things that we had talked about last time was the role of leisure for families. A lot of this work is based on a model that Gretchen had talked about earlier, core and balance, and it's an idea that Raymond Zabriskie and I put forward a little over 20 years ago, and has really been studied a lot by leisure researchers about the role of family leisure and family satisfaction. And one of the consistent findings, and I had mentioned earlier, although all family leisure is not necessarily positive, the vast majority of research has shown that family leisure and frequency of family leisure has been associated with greater satisfaction with both family leisure as well as family life. It really also supports this idea of engagement and interaction. The role of being able to engage in activities, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute, but one of the things that's really interesting about leisure and recreation, one of the formal qualities of play is that the outcome has to be in doubt. That if it's a foregone conclusion how things are going to turn out, there's no fun in it. The fun is gone from it. And so this unpredictability and possibility for things to turn out unexpectedly also requires us to be able to interact with each other about what happened there, to discuss it. And so this really does start to contribute to an understanding of one another. It's a way that strong, close relationships actually are formed. And while we may assume that family relationships are close relationships, that's not necessarily the case, particularly as children start to get older. The connections may be less obvious and fewer opportunities for spending time with each other. So some of the things that we can do leisure for families, and I think we had mentioned this last time, but one of the things that it can do is provide some structure to one's life. Particularly if you have school-age children who are engaged in activities outside of school, a lot of times the family life structure is really around what children's activities are. and getting them to and from both school as well as any after school or evening programming. And so that certainly can provide structure. This idea of improving parent-child communication, Gretchen had mentioned earlier this idea of we-ness, and what we are focused on here is, and this is something that came within this initial model, was how families can build an identity around the things that they do. One of the most interesting things about the pandemic is my family started, well, I started a family Zoom on Friday evenings. And it started in, I think it was in March or April of 2020, and we've continued every Friday. And I have an older brother, a younger sister, my mom's still living. And we're the core that shows up every Friday, but our kids, who are all adults now, and sometimes even grandkids will appear. And what's funny is that there are stories that are retold about the family and different parts of the family. There are stories that are retold about that only myself, my brother, sister, and my mother would understand. Nobody else in the family even knows those stories, but we recognize them, and it's part of who we are. And so this idea of communication, and it's a lot of times around family vacations. That was, we were one of those families that everyone piled in the car every summer and we went somewhere. But these are part of the things that really connect people together around shared experience, and particularly those shared experiences that really stand out from the mundane, from the everyday. And so we really can have an opportunity to establish this idea of communication, an identity of who we are as a group. Because if you weren't there, you wouldn't understand, what it was to be camping in Orlando the year before Disney broke ground. And that was part of our experience. And then last, one of the things that's interesting is being able to see each other's skills and abilities. I think this is really very valuable in terms of both for parents and for children. That is very important for parents to be able to see the skills and abilities that their children have, things that we might not otherwise see, and to be able to reinforce those and support those. But at the same time, it's also important for children to see, as Gretchen was mentioning, sometimes, children only see the work parent who's having a challenge to manage everything. But occasionally, through recreation and leisure, we can see, mom's actually a pretty fast runner, or, dad can actually ride a bike, which I didn't know, kind of thing. And so this is an opportunity for both children and parents to be able to see each other's skills and abilities, and to be able to recognize them and value each other for those things. You're muted.
Yes, I realized. We about the benefits of family, particularly the balance that you outside in the community. And we're asking here to respond to how I participate in fair. And so this is different than things that just happen, or kind of day-to-day activities that you might do at home with your kids. Think about how often you participate in it. You saw something, you made a plan, and you executed it as a family unit. And for those of you who are listening as maybe providers that are supporting people, and you don't have children, you can think about planned family leisure more broadly. So with other family members, or even perhaps when you were a child with your family.
So, Gretchen, I'm not sure exactly if it was me or if it was you, but we did seem to have a little bit of instability there in terms of your connection.
It's possibly me.
Okay.
Am I still here?
Yes, as far as I can hear and see.
Okay, I did have a notification that I was experiencing unstable internet.
Okay.
So apologies, but hopefully I stay here.
Yeah. So, as I'm looking at it, we've got almost an even split between people who rarely or sometimes engage in planned family leisure and those who often and always do so. And so this is actually, I think, a really interesting way of looking at this, because it is challenging. it's not the easiest thing in the world to do in terms of participating in planned activities. So.
And we will move on to talking about some strategies to plan family leisure. There it is again. Hopefully you guys can see the results. Otherwise they are right here, but I am going to close them. And so what we're going to talk about is some strategies that you might use to identify interests, explore barriers and facilitators, and then finally make a plan to participate in activities with your family. And the first thing that we wanted to talk about was how do you identify family interests? And this could be things that your kids want to do, but it's also important to think about collectively what the family would like to do. So if you're always, or if you're only planning interests around what one member is interested in doing, then it's challenging to really build connections, especially as kids get older and they feel like they're being, dragged to things that they don't necessarily have an interest in. And, some strategies that you might use is to think about the things that you enjoyed as a child and think about what you enjoyed doing with your family when you were younger. And those are the types of things that you can, look to recreate or do similar type activities in finding things that you might want to try. You can also talk to friends, neighbors, or extended family to see if they have ideas about opportunities. Similarly, if there are family groups or parent groups on social media that you belong to, you might be able to learn about opportunities that are in your area, and sort of you can explore then what might be an interest specifically to your family. And then, of course, ask your kids what they want to do. Is there something that they saw on TV or in a book? Did a friend tell them about something cool that sounds fun? Did maybe a friend participate in an activity recently that they have an interest in? Or even share opportunities that might be available and ask for their input. The idea there is that it sort of gives everyone an opportunity to contribute to what the family activity is going to be, and thus everyone is really a member in contributing to what that plan is. And then go through that list again together so that you can find some things that collectively there's an interest in. And here are some ideas. And when we were looking for opportunities, we were striving for activities that are available in a number of communities, but also either free or low cost, because we do know, and we'll talk about barriers in a minute, but we do know that finances can certainly be a barrier to participation. But if you think about going on a picnic with your family in a local park, camping can be something that might be an interest. This one up here in the corner looks like a movie in the park. I know a number of parks will have a summer movie series where it's free to go and watch a movie in the park. It looks like there might be workshops. Actually, I do know Home Depot often offers workshops where you can learn how to make things. And these guys look like they're making a birdhouse. There could be opportunities for gardening or volunteering. I know locally in Philadelphia, they do a park cleanup activity, but they also have an event where you can plant trees. Really require any special skills. They connect you with someone who knows what they're doing. You just are there to help and connect with new members that do that activity. Markets often have opportunities, and then the free library. So they are they have books inside of them, and few of them in the neighborhood, and my 3-year-old likes to go bring them into our walks so he can check out what books are. And there's other concerts in the park that might be of interest, and so there's a lot of a lot of opportunities that may take a little bit of digging to find out what's in your own local community, but there are options. There are often a number of options that might be affordable or free that could be these activities that you might plan around. And so next, once you've thought about the types of activities that you are interested in, we have a quick poll here, and then I'm going to hand it off to Brian to talk about barriers, but think about things that might be barriers to participation in your own life, and also those things that might help you facilitate participation. And if you have other ideas about either barriers or facilitators, please add them to the chat. We had sort of fixed options.
And Gretchen, when we talk about, the concepts of barriers and facilitators, we're really talking about those things that either get in the way of doing things or those things that really support our ability to do those things. And sometimes, as Gretchen, you mentioned, that they can be, both a barrier and a facilitator. So certain things. All right. And so money and time are two that are pretty widely identified as a barrier. Social support is also identified as a barrier by a couple of people. In terms of facilitators, time is another one that seems to get, and social support also gets a lot of identification there in terms of what people see as the most important. It's interesting because I'm going to stop sharing. It's interesting because I've mentioned to some of my colleagues, I think time is one of the big challenges. Whenever anybody studies anything about recreational leisure, one of the biggest barriers is time. And that's a challenge because time, unlike most other things, is relatively fixed. We really only have so much time in a day. And so the challenge partly in thinking through about time, either as a barrier, but also potentially as a facilitator, is that when we don't have time for recreation leisure, it partly says that we value other things more because other things are what are taking up the time we would otherwise use. So it's one of those things too, where, thinking about, well, time may be a barrier to being able to do it. Valuing family leisure may be a facilitator that changes that time phenomenon. In other words, we actually that becomes part of our plan. So, so some of the things that we typically see, and most folks have identified that, is that when we deal with these barriers, these are things that prevent us from doing something that we would like to do. The field of dreams, if you build it, he will come, was always one of the problems in public parks and recreation, because that was the assumption, right? If you build it, people will come. And then what they found out was that people didn't come, even if they built these resources. And so there was a whole area of research that began to understand, why don't people do things that they would otherwise want to do? And so this whole area of barriers research developed, and to start to think about it on a couple of different levels. One is, there are definitely structural sorts of barriers that we run into, and these are usually time, money, transportation, equipment, or products. But then there are also some interpersonal types of barriers we have, and folks identified social support as one of those. Is that a lot of times it's easier to do things if other people will support us to do those, and so that becomes a facilitator if we have that, but it may be a barrier if we don't have that. A single parent doing a family leisure outing is much more complex than a parent with a partner or two parents doing a outing with three kids or something along those lines. And so that then becomes important. And maybe those partners are parents of the parents, kind of a thing, grandparents. But those are the kinds of things that we would be looking at, is what are the supports that people would need. And then, the one other thing that sometimes is talked about and it's mentioned here, it's identified here, is this idea of attitudes. And attitudes can be a barrier, but they can also be a facilitator. And attitudes that certain people don't do certain types of activities, certain genders don't do certain types of activities, certain age people don't do certain types of activities. These are all types of attitudes that may get in the way of being able to do these do activities. And Gretchen, some of your work on welcoming spaces is another idea of how we can deal with either a barrier or a facilitator, right? That when people feel like they're welcome in a place, that they belong there, that they're much more likely and willing to go.
Yeah, I think, the attitudinal barriers from both within the family unit can certainly be a factor. It's really hard to get motivated, to get everyone up and ready to do something if someone is very negative about the activity. And, conversely, if you go into places where you don't feel welcomed or that you belong, then, that's another factor that's going to make it really difficult to want to participate, even taking that step to get out the door to do it. And so finding those places that you feel welcomed and your family feels welcome and connected to, but also finding the motivation and encouragement for the members of your family to participate, so that everybody is on board and ready to go, can make that transition from planning to actual participation a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so a lot of times what we do in supporting people and supporting families is help them to work through and identify these, what are the things that may get in the way, but what are the things that they could marshal to make that happen. And so when we start to think about this in terms of concrete activities and some of the resources we have available, and I see Hannah had put in the chat also some of the things about the parenting intervention that we're testing, is really that this idea of starting to really identify what are some of the barriers that might get in the way. And so, for example, going to the zoo, Philadelphia has a very nice zoo. I know there are a number of other zoos. I actually saw some of the places where people were from. But when we start to think about the barriers, one is that clearly there is there's an entrance fee. The other issue is we do have to consider weather. Most zoos are principally outdoors, and so trying to figure out a way to work with the weather. And I'm guessing everybody's having the same spring we're having here in the Northeast, which is spring today, winter tomorrow, spring the next day, summer a day later, and back to winter. And
rain somewhere in there too.
Yeah. But then some of the things that time obviously it's a challenge, and so particularly coordinating with multiple people's schedules, and then some of these attitudinal barriers that may get in the way too. I think particularly when we feel that we are different from most of the people who are there, it's a little challenging to feel like you belong, and that is something that many people deal with on a regular basis. So those are definitely some barriers. I think one of the things that we think about with facilitators, though, is trying to really work through how could we find some things that will support us to be able to do things. For example, is there public transportation that is easily accessible? This is Gretchen, I think you were talking about the Philadelphia Zoo. I can't remember.
Yeah. And there's a bus, actually, there's a trolley that goes right by the zoo here locally. There's also opportunities. I mean, if you buy lunch at the zoo, it's quite pricey, but there's no rules against bringing in your own lunch. And so you can have a picnic in the zoo. So if you pack a sandwich and yogurt or whatever you eat, that makes the cost go down substantially.
And one of the other things is to find out when is the best price, because a lot of times public entities do have different prices for different times. of day and sometimes different holidays. And so one of the things to do is find out if there are any discounted days or options for discounted prices. There are many public agencies like zoos and museums that recognize that not everybody can afford the entrance price, and they may have opportunities for discounted entrance. Taking a friend or going with someone, particularly when it comes to a family, as I mentioned, as a single parent, it is quite challenging. I've been fortunate to have been co-parenting all the time that my children were young, but also there were a lot of times when my wife's job had her on the road for a week or more at a time, and understanding how challenging it was to do things as a single parent. And so having somebody to go with you and support you is actually something that it's much easier to do something for the first time if you go with somebody you already know.
And I also think, to add to that, if there are people, if there are people that have been to that activity or that space, it may make it a little bit easier because they know if there's anxiety around going to a new place and sort of figuring everything out on the cuff, because you can find out information online, but there's a difference between like learning about the opportunities that are there and actually having experienced it. So if it makes someone more comfortable to go with a family friend who has done it before, or even who is just more comfortable in new environments, then that might be something to consider in planning who you might want to go with.
And then along the lines of planning, just really looking at what might be a good opportunity to go on days that might not be as crowded. While the weekend definitely is one of the most obvious times that we might do some things like go to a zoo, the challenge is that's the time for most other people to go to the zoo as well. And so trying to find out ways that you could do things either off times during the weekdays or on days when kids may not have school. That's another way. It is challenging to coordinate with parent schedules though too, because a lot of times parents kids may have the day off from school, but we don't always have the day off from work, and so that then becomes a bit of a challenge as well.
So let's do an example. So let's think about an activity, and obviously there's this example up here is kayaking, but that doesn't have to be the example that we talk through. But think about, and we can think about an activity. Let's all think about a common activity, and if someone wants to throw one into chat, that would be great. Otherwise, we can pick one, but I'll give folks that are on the call a minute to add something if they would like to. And this, and try to focus on an activity that occurs out in the community. I will throw some ideas out there. It could be, a family picnic. It could be going to a community fair or festival that might be happening. It could be going on a local hike. And if you don't want to add one, then I will ask Hannah, pick one. Hi, all right, Hannah picks hiking. All right, so what might be some of the barriers that you would experience with hiking or could? Brian, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of them is definitely availability of trails.
Okay.
So access to trails may be really challenging. If I live in a particularly urban area, it may be difficult for me to get to a trail.
Mm-hmm. So how does one overcome that? I mean, that's very location specific. So how do you maybe not find the exact same experience, but something similar?
Well, it depends on where I am. I mean, knowing Philadelphia a little bit, there are some large parks in Philadelphia, and so it'd be a matter of getting to them, because there are probably some paths, or it may not be hiking in mountains or in state parks or something like that, but most major cities do have some sort of park system, and so there may be a way to get there relatively inexpensively.
Yeah, and I think, if you think about hiking, part of it is that access to nature and being outdoors in a maybe a less busy environment like a city sidewalk. And if there are not places that are true trails, perhaps there are natural environments that you could go to that might provide a similar experience. Figuring out what is the benefit of hiking. If it's the opportunity to be outside and get some physical activity, that's one thing. But if it's the connection to nature, then that might be a way to address that. And then it looks like there was a comment that unfamiliar terrain, roads or streets, if you're used to walking on roads or streets, how do you prepare for unfamiliar terrain, which might include dirt or mud sometimes, or rocky trails? And I'm just going to add here.
Yeah. I also wonder, I mean, hiking, is one of those things that would typically have very little in the way of equipment required, other than, appropriate outdoor types of equipment, if, whether that's a rain jacket or a hat or whatever, but appropriate shoes kind of thing is particularly something. So it wouldn't be huge in terms of resources. So it should be relatively easy in terms of resources.
Yeah, and but thinking about the unfamiliar terrain, and Brian, you mentioned the types of shoes. I think it's just good to think about, how do you prep your family for a successful experience? Flip-flops are probably not a good choice, or open-toed shoes, because even if you're used to walking outdoors, but you're typically walking on sidewalks, going to a trail, even if you haven't been to it before, you can suspect that it might not be as consistent as a sidewalk. So making sure that everyone is wearing closed-toed shoes with socks is probably a good idea. Bringing unfamiliar terrain, you also may not know where, if there's a place to fill up a water bottle along the way. So making sure that you bring water with you.
And it's interesting because Gretchen, you had mentioned motivation before. And so I'm going to quote my grandson, Stuart, on a hike. He said, "My legs are bored." He is not a fan of walking. And so a family hike is not his idea of a good time. His older brother, George, likes to walk, and George runs pretty much everywhere. He doesn't walk, he just runs everywhere. But for Stuart, if you wanted to make a hike interesting, you would have to think about, where could we stop and do something interesting? Like, is there a pond? Can we stop at a pond? Can we stop? I mean, and so thinking about, how do we overcome the motivation barrier, we think about, well, what are people interested in? Stuart's not interested in walking, but he does like being outside, and he likes messing around, and so thinking about how we design this in a way that meets the needs of everyone in the family is important as well.
Well, and you mentioned nature and hiking. There's tons of things to see. Could you very quickly plan a scavenger hunt that you're likely to see? Find a tree that fell over, find a red bird. My 3-year-old is obsessed with robins lately, because he can pick them out because of their red belly. So knowing these types of things that might engage the whole family, even if the primary activity is not everyone's cup of tea, so to speak, can be a great way to help increase that motivation for everyone. All right, so that is some ideas, and I'm looking at the time. We have about 10 minutes left, so we will move through some of these. Oh, my thing moved a little bit quicker. I'll scoot that over. And so this is some things, and I think the left-hand side with the 8 numbers, if you were here for the last presentation, then this might look familiar because I think it was there. So think about the activity, consider who you'd like to go with you, where are you going to go, the cost, date and time, how are you going to get there, any food and drink that might be necessary, whether or not you can purchase it there, or is it something that you want to bring to possibly minimize cost? And then as you're creating that, figuring out what you need, I think it's helpful to create a checklist just to make sure that you have everything on the day of the activity. And these don't have to be overly formal. They can just be sort of, a note card with the things that you want to make sure you have before you run out the door. And, here's an example, and this was obviously created in reference to activities that you might be doing with your family during, after the pandemic started. And some of these things may be important. You want to have clean face masks, hand sanitizer, wipes if you're going to highly public places, your wallet, your keys, how you're going to get there, and then water or snacks. And this isn't, an end all be all list. It's pretty generic, but it might be something just to kind of get you thinking about the types of things that you might need for your family. And I'm going to jump ahead to this one just because now it moved back because it keeps it, it gives an example of some activities. And so on the left-hand side, there is a pretty simple activity that doesn't require a lot of planning, but it's still out in the community, and it's a little more novel than just going for a walk in the park. So Kindness Rocks, actually there's our partners at the Copeland Center. There are some folks there that are doing some mental health awareness rocks for the month of May. And they're painting these rocks and leaving them, kind of hiding them in different locations that are out in the public. And so this can be kind of fun. It can encourage people to do their own scavenger hunt. And so if you look through here, it's the activity is painting these rocks. The guests are myself and kid. And then the location is picking something that is local. So it could be the park down the street. It could be a local town square. And then, Brian, can you take over?
Yeah.
For a minute?
Yeah. And so, as Gretchen was saying, so on the left-hand side, we're really looking at how we could focus on this as a simple activity that really can be done fairly close to home and require very little planning. Basically it's walking distance, it's an after-school activity, and then the checklist really is just those things that are necessary to create this. But again, extremely low cost and low complexity. On the other hand, we can look at a more complex approach. For example, going to the zoo, in which we're really thinking about not just only the parent and child, but also a neighbor and perhaps the child's friend. And that's a lot of times the way that these groups are created. And so if we're headed to the zoo, then we've got to really think about it. And cost may be more. This is one of those things that perhaps you want to, somebody has the resources and the interest in being able to be a member, because the membership then provides more visits at a reduced cost or free admission, and a longer time during the day.
And I'll also throw locally, I know there are a few libraries here that have memberships that you can check out from the library. So you can also get the benefits from having a membership without actually having one. You do have to be aware of it. And sometimes you also have to make sure that they are available when you're trying to get them. But so that's something to consider if finances or costs are a barrier to participation. And then thinking about the resources or the things that you'd like to bring with you. Again, bringing food and drink with you can make it a lot less expensive. And it can also make sure that you know what's available, particularly if someone in your family has specific dietary needs, you can make sure that you have that. It also, if you're like my kids or your kids are like my kids, then late lunches often don't go over well because people get moody and cranky, and sometimes there's lines that you don't necessarily want to deal with at the zoo. So having snacks in your bag or a lunch in your bag may make that a lot easier, and everybody can sit down at sort of the expected time to eat, and then you go about the zoo business.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, what you mentioned, Gretchen. With my grandsons, they'll die in the next 5 minutes without water. So you better have water.
All right, so again, this is just an example. These are not, obviously these are just two examples. And as a quick reminder, if this is something you are interested in, or you're supporting someone who might be interested in this type of activity, and you feel like they might need some additional support, at the very end, which is in a couple minutes, we will talk more specifically about the intervention project that we are doing, and would love to have more people involved. But just as kind of a summary of the things that we talked about today, this is really where this is what we did, and these are the things that we're hoping that you take away from this. When you're thinking about interests, think about your own interests, but talk to your family to figure out what those interests are, and pick something. The planning process starts with picking an activity to do, and it can seem challenging because there's tons of options, and if you're like me, it's like, oh, we could do this or we could do that, but finally settling on something is a great place to start, and then figuring out when and how to do it. The internet, a library, or other people who have done it can be great resources to help you figure it out. And then if there's anxiety around participating in a new activity or just doing something that's out of your typical routine, thinking through those potential barriers that relate to that activity can really help you make a plan for how to navigate those, so that you can feel prepared for anything that might happen, even if they're things that don't end up happening. So knowing what your plan is in case it rains, even if it doesn't rain, might help reduce your stress and anxiety around participation, that you'll be more successful and more relaxed when the day actually comes to do it. And then that follows with 5 and 6. Think about the facilitators that can help, and then make a plan that considers those barriers and facilitators. And again, if this is a topic that you are interested in, this is like it's a game. It just goes back and forth. If there are topics that you're interested in, here are a number of resources that we have on here. The calendar, which is a family leisure calendar, and it looks like it may be from 2018, is, obviously the dates are wrong, but the activities, and it encourages you month by month to think through different types of family leisure activities. So that can be another source of inspiration around activities. You can also take the information and add it to your own calendar, so that it is not a 2018 calendar, but a 2022 calendar. And I believe Hannah is popping these into the chat. We will also send out a summary from today with the recording, and these links will be available there as well. And finally, if you are interested in participating in this type of project, we do have a research study that is going on. It is 10 weeks. As Hannah mentioned, the first 5 weeks will focus on those core activities or those everyday activities that you might do with your children. And then the last 5 weeks are really participating on these more novel community-based activities. It is both group and individual based. So one of the cool things about this is that it would connect you with another group of other parents who experience mental health conditions and also have children. It's all going to be done virtually. Obviously, we will be encouraging real participation outside the virtual world, but those are things that you'll be able to do on your own with your child. And so if you're interested in this, or if you support people who you know are parents and they might be interested in this, please reach out to us. The email address is here at tucollab.temple.edu. Hannah has also dropped the landing page for the project in the chat. And you can also, if you lift your phone up and show it on that little QR code, it will direct you to that link as well. And finally, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. If I can get to the chat, I will add my email address. And then Brian can add his as well.
Yep.
And finally, we are offering certificates of attendance if this is something that you might need for your work, or for, I know peers are required to participate in a number of different trainings. We are happy to provide you with a certificate of attendance that includes the name of the presentation and the date, and also the time that was an hour that happened today. And Kathy Arizawa at temple.edu is where to send that, and it is here. And we will, when we send out the information from the collaborative, we will include her email address as well. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We are so excited that you are here to share this and that you were interested in the topic. We do have another webinar coming up on June 2nd at noon. We have tried to vary the time availability for these to hit on times where people might be at their lunch hour. So if the time doesn't work for you, but you are interested, please register because you'll be on the list then to receive the recording. Thanks. And thank you, Doreen. I'm glad that you'll be able to share the information. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to follow up with us.
Both our emails are there. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day.